involved with the COVID-19 data for the New York Times. And before that, I really had more of traditional roles in newsrooms. I came up as a more traditional reporter doing writing and a lot of multimedia as well. And my first experience doing data journalism was in one single college class where we learned how to use Access, and things have changed a lot since then.
Awesome. Carla, do you want to go next?
Hi, I'm Carla. I am data visuals developer at the Texas Tribune. Before I was data reporter at NJ.com. And yeah, so I as far as training that I've had, I've done a lot of NICAR classes and a lot of self-taught things. But I also went to graduate school at CUNY J School, and then they had a couple classes on data journalism then. And so yeah.
Awesome. Nick, do you want to go next?
Sure. Currently, I'm freelancing, covering courts and data stuff in the LA area, and so I did a lot of data stuff, local papers, Delaware in Delaware, and freelancing too. And like Carla, I went to CUNY and I took some data journalism classes there, and I guess I didn't realize at the time in undergrad I took some design classes too, so that really helped out a lot with me. And now.
Perfect. Steven, do you want to go next?
Sure. I'm Steve Sterling. I am a project editor at Columbia Journalism Investigations at Columbia University. I'm running a team who's looking into voting access in a partnership with Gannett and Frontline. In terms of training, I totally learned all of this on the job. NICAR was a big help, but a lot of it was sort of pestering my colleague constantly, like Carla, who I worked with for a great many years, and would bring my coding problems to and stuff like that. So reliance on the sort of data journalism community is probably the chiefest reason that I'm here.
Perfect. Darla, do you want to go next?
Sure. Hi. Okay. I'm Darla Cameron. I'm the data visuals editor at the Texas Tribune. Previously, I worked at the Washington Post on the graphics desk, and in Florida at the Tampa Bay Times. I studied journalism and geography at Mizzou in college a while ago, and that kind of gave me a foundation. But I think that a lot of the development tools that I use now and that the people that I work with use were things that I learned kind of on my own over time with help from colleagues and programs like NICAR. So happy to be here.
Great, thanks. And Nathan, do you want to go last?
Sure. So my name is Nathan Griffiths. I'm a data journalist at the Vancouver Sun in British Columbia in Canada. I previously worked at the graphics desk for the Associated Press, which is where I kind of did most of my on-the-job training, and then I also worked for a little bit at the Times. As far as education, I was mostly self-taught. I came from 10 years in IT before I moved into journalism. And around this time when data journalism and data visualization was really sort of started to pick up. So with my background, I think the learning curve for picking these things up was quite a bit less steep, I think, than for maybe many other journalists. So I was able to pick a lot of it up, just kind of self-taught and working with other journalists in the newsroom, things like that.
Great. Thank you all so much. We're really excited to have you all here. And this panel is sort of meant to be an introduction to a lot of what the life of a data journalist is for people who are early in their careers and trying to figure out exactly, what it is they want to do, where it is they want to go, and how to navigate sort of the early career space in data journalism. So we're just going to start out by sort of taking a couple of questions that we have, and then also for anybody who's listening in, if you want to type your questions in the question and answer panel, we'll also get to all of those. So to start out, data journalism is a time-sensitive job because it is journalism. So I'm wondering how you all sort of balance the pressure to get your stories out with also making sure that your data is, accurate and fully fleshed out and things like that.
I guess I can go first on that. So there's a few techniques. One is on daily turnaround, daily stories. I typically just work with data that's pretty much clean and ready to go. So if someone comes to me with a story, or if I'm pitching a story and the data turns out to look like it's going to need a lot of cleaning and organizing, and there's going to be a lot of work on it, which means I'm going to have to go back in and review it all. Then for a daily story, it won't happen daily. I mean, it'll be often the case where you'll need a day or two just to basically work with the data. Sometimes even before you know what the story is. A lot of times even before you know what the story is. But there's a fair bit of data out there, I found at least, that you can grab. It's pretty clean, it's pretty reliable sourcing, and you can work with your analysis and results fairly quickly from that. So it's a little bit of a split. If it's a reliable source and it's tidy, then there's not as much worry, I think, for myself at least, about I don't have to do as granular a backgrounding or a check on the work that's been done. Yeah.
Awesome. Anybody else have thoughts?
Yeah, I have thoughts. Like, I think whenever it comes to like time and like time management, it really depends on like your relationship with your editors and how you can communicate how much time this is going to get. Because sometimes you're like, oh, let me explore this data set. And then you figure out very quickly, oh, this is going to take a lot more time. So it's really important for you to have a good relationship with your editors, your managing editors, who may not know exactly what you do and what like technical things you need to do and how long it's going to take. If you like are open with them and be like, hey, like, I thought this was going to be a quick thing, but then I realized that this data, it's not correct and I need more time to like, maybe like look through it, or maybe like make some phone calls to understand this data, then like, your editors like will understand and give you that little bit of time and space. But, it really just depends on like the data that you get and like how much leeway you get with your editors, and just being very honest about what the limitations are, especially time limitations of data.
Yeah, that open communication is really important. I think that's a really good point. Like just letting your editors know, like you said, hey, this is going to take longer.
I think on that note, the other thing that a lot of people like looking at work that seems really technically complicated don't realize is that we're not starting from scratch ever. Like we have a system that we use for every single graphic and project that the Tribune publishes that's built in Node. It's open source. It's available for anybody to use, but that foundation enables us to work really quickly. And there are a lot of things that like we've seen and done so many times that we know how long we have a better sense of how long it's going to take us to actually produce like complicated looking work.
Yeah, could I add to that? I just think that's really true. And it's an important skill even in other types of journalism stories, as well as being able to assess like how long this is going to take and having a good pitch to your editor that, some things might take months and other things you can get done in a day. And you have to get pretty good at telling which is which so that you can prepare your editor for what it's going to be. Otherwise, like, I definitely made that mistake early in my career, just even in written stories, of thinking like, this is a 3,000 word story that I'm going to work on for a while. And my editor's like, no, that's like maybe 600 words. And I think data is the same way, that you have to have a good sense of how much you're actually going to get from it.
I think one of the strategies that I'd always employed as a reporter was I just don't tell my editors what I'm working on until I feel comfortable enough with the data. Because I know the moment that I do, that may start a process that I have less control over and might move quicker than I want to, just because of the reality of newsrooms. And, as I've transitioned to becoming an editor, I sort of have that expectation of my reporters too. I want you to come to me with pitches that are fully formed, not concepts. You can get yourself into trouble if you come and you pitch an idea that somebody likes. And then a lot of people really like up the chain, and you're not really prepared to fully push it through in a quick time.
Absolutely. That's all really, really good insight, sort of keeping the lines of communication open and making sure that you're, sure of yourself, and then also making that really clear to, the people you work with, including your editors. So sort of going off of some of those thoughts, when you're doing these like initial working with data to see if there's a story there, like how do you pick the stories that you actually pursue, versus, working with data for a day and then realizing that it's not something that you actually want to, continue on a publishing pipeline with?
So for me, at least, a lot of times I help like when I was working at the News Journal in Delaware, I was like the one of two data people, and so a lot of times I was helping other people with data for their stories, and so I would like have like the know what data sets are there like out there by the state, and then and a lot of times I'm looking at particular stories. When I find something interesting, I kind of like pursue that more, and then I forgot about the other data sets. I kind of keep in the back of my head for like other things that I could possibly work on for other reporters' stories.
I feel like a lot of the time when I was, working in a reporting capacity, is I'm just constantly looking for data sets and working with them and playing around with them on different topics and stuff like that. So, and over time, you then develop a sort of Rolodex of data that allows you to respond to things and work with stuff more quickly. But, being able to constantly be looking at stuff, is helps me do things quicker in the future, which has been super important as my career's gone on.
Yeah, also when I'm exploring data sets and what to pursue, I always have a plan beforehand before the exploratory process. I'm like, I want to look into this and that and that, and if I don't find anything, like, then I kind of move on, because one of the things that like it's so easy to do is just get lost in your data and be like, I'm going to find something because this data is so amazing, when sometimes there's no story there. So I go into the data exploration before I even do anything, like with some ideas of what I want to look at, what's newsworthy, and like what can be a story. And then like that helps me sort of like have everything become manageable, and then be like, oh, this is a story, versus like me wasting my time for like, like a whole day trying to find a story into something that I have no idea what I'm doing.
Yeah, I would second that. I mean, you need to know some questions to ask your data, I think, right? Before you should have an idea of what you're hoping to get from it or what might be in there, I think. You might find some unexpected things, and that would be great, but I don't know. I've never had any luck just with going through a data set and being like, oh, I'll find something in here. That, for me, that just never happens. Like it always has to be, okay, I want to know, like, I have this question and I want to answer that. Can I find that out? And if not, then it's a good time to toss the story.
Yeah, and it's not as if you can't to these data sets. I mean, I feel like, even if you come in with a prepared set of questions, there's going to be times where you don't find a story, and that's okay. You now have that experience with that data set, and there will be another story. So, it's not like you just trash it. It's valuable time regardless. Stash it away, and maybe 3 months down the road, you have a reason to use that data set again, and you find that story, because time has created change.
I was thinking the same thing, that there were a lot of times like early in my career where it was like, if this isn't a story today, it's not worth my time. And as time has gone on, there's lots of things that maybe weren't interesting then, but I realize it's not wasted time, because then something else happens and it does become important. And it's kind of like cultivating sources for people too, because they might not have anything valuable for you now, but down the road something changes or becomes catastrophic, and suddenly you're like really glad you spent that time when you did, because maybe you don't have time now that it's urgent.
Awesome. Kuhu, do you want to continue with the next questions? Also, a reminder for everybody who's listening in, feel free to put any questions that you might have for our panelists in the Q&A sidebar, and we will ask those as well, intermixed with our own questions.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kuhu, and like talking about the data sets, I have this question that how do you deal with the lack of data? And do you feel the responsibility of putting out the correct data?
So Delaware sucks with data, or majority of data compared to like places like California. So a lot of times I go to other places like nonprofits, and then a lot of times the federal government too, and then try to just like localize it. Delaware's kind of a small state, so small enough to do like a story on the whole state kind of thing, and I guess just like figure out other ways. Usually, and a lot of times I get connected with the data community in the area too, so that to ask them questions about what data do they have.
I think especially right now during the pandemic, a lot of the story in Texas has been the lack of data. So we will go in assuming like, oh, surely the state keeps track of this, and like they don't. So that's the story, the fact that they aren't watching, that they aren't counting, that they'll give us numbers like the number of cases in child care centers without knowing how many kids are in child care centers. You can't really know how prevalent the problem is, which is especially challenging in a big state with lots of child care centers. So we're constantly saying, okay, when is the story that the data is bad or that it's problematic or that it's missing? Like that is part of the news too. And a lot of times we're hearing so much from readers right now that the questions that they're asking us will like lead to more reporting and kind of further. People will say, well, what's going on with this? And this seems wrong. And we're like, well, this is the best we have right now from the state. And if that's significant enough, then we can do a separate, story out of the data with that question.
And sometimes reporting about how bad the data is or why it's lacking can sometimes shame agencies to releasing more data. And like it can help, and then it can help you out in the end when they just decide, oh yeah, this is important, I'm going to release all of this. So yeah, like it's always important to like sometimes the story is the lack of data, and you should follow that like angle.
I think this is one thing that news organizations have gotten a lot better at. Like if you're watching this for, 10, 15 years, is that contextualization has gotten a lot better. I see a lot more explainers of like where the data comes from and what are the limitations, and a lot more like annotations on visualizations that are explaining, okay, here's the best we've got, but here's why it's probably not perfect or that good. And I think that's really important because it's almost never, right, that you have a data set that's actually perfect. And so being able to explain those problems is good. I mean, I think it's really true that often becomes the story too, and that you can cause change by pointing it out. We had a pretty it's a hard topic, but it was a good example here locally, mid-sized city. They didn't collect any type of racial data related to policing. And about 5 years ago, they started doing that. And it was actually a pretty big effort that involved like a couple different agencies and academics. And recently that's paid off. Now there's this data trail, and newspapers were writing stories about it this summer. And I was like kind of proud because it was something that years ago people had noticed and said, hey, we need this data. And now we're seeing, changes because of that. But it took years. It wasn't something that happened overnight.
Part of it's accountability. Like this is the data that officials are using to make really important decisions that are often have life or death consequences, especially right now. So by like questioning what data they have, we can further hold them accountable for the decisions that they make.
Yeah, that's definitely some helpful insights. We have a question in the chat box. How can I pitch from Sydney? There's a question from Sydney. How can I pitch myself for data journalism opportunities? Should I start as a freelancer and create my own projects to pitch before applying for more formal data team positions? Any thoughts?
I mean, it never hurts to have a portfolio of some kind. I don't think it matters what the job is.
Yeah, I always like to tell, I got an internship at the graphics desk at the New York Times after I was a graduate student. And a lot of people ask me, like, how did you apply? And it was like, honestly, I didn't really, but I did have a portfolio ready. So it was like 90% luck, but 10% having a portfolio ready to go. And that's really hard to prepare for. But I also think it's worth noting that, like, your portfolio doesn't have to be the best possible work. Like, employers aren't looking for you to be, if it's an entry level position, they're not looking for you to become the top person in their newsroom. They're looking for somebody who's going to be able to learn their system and jump in really quickly. And so your portfolio needs to focus on that, like showing that you can find the story and get a project all the way completed. It doesn't have to be like, the best work ever. Hopefully, right? You're hopefully going to go on to do better work.
I think when hiring people, like Lisa said, like, you're not looking for this perfect, gorgeous, publishable thing. Like, it should be clean, no typos, but we're looking more for the ideas and how. I want to know how people think. Like, how do you approach problem solving with data? What kind of things do you look for? What's your visual thought process as you're building a visualization? Like, what are the kind of like, what is your approach towards the work? I think is much more important than like all of this perfect experience. And I want to see that in the environment, in the newsrooms where you worked, you were thinking about using data, and like, or even if you weren't in a newsroom, that you're like having creative ideas about how to approach storytelling. But it doesn't have to be like fully formed or perfect. And I would recommend, if you can, internships or fellowships. A lot of places are doing them remotely, which is going to be different, obviously, but it's a good way to try to figure out, like, is this really what I want to be doing, and make a better pitch and develop and build your portfolio. And places are going to take care of you in a different way than when you start. It's just like, all right, you're working, but for fellows and interns, you'll get a little more mentorship and like structure around making sure you're learning what we want you to learn.
I'd also say the avenues for building your portfolio are probably more wide open than they've ever been too. I mean, if you want to, I always try to do things to keep my reporting chops open, start a newsletter or something, even if it's just for you, just so that you're doing stuff, just so that you're practicing reporting. I started a COVID newsletter in February, and it's a dime a dozen and it's a drop in the ocean for anything, but it's actually made me a couple $1,000s in revenue now 6 months later. And it is a weekly opportunity for me to put out data visualizations, for me to analyze data, for me to do that. And that's real work that you can showcase, to get your foot in the door maybe someplace.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be all like serious or about like news stories. Like when in the few months when I was laid off, I made this data visualizations on Pop-Tarts using Gilmore Girls episodes, and that like people really like loved it and like connected to it, even if they weren't fans of Gilmore Girls. Like I was. So like it just be something that like you're interested in and you want to build and you want to show off your skills. It doesn't like have to be like, part of like a big story reporting or even ever be published in like a news media. Like you just self-publish it and just show what you got, and like that can be really helpful for your portfolio.
Oh yeah, so for me too, a lot of times when I'm like interviewing for jobs, I usually like tend to pitch like data related stories, and but I guess sometimes like you might get, even though you might not get the job, you might get like a freelance story out of it. It happened to me once, but it was kind of cool. But yeah, and then like everyone said, like kind of like take up hobbies. I come from a design background, so I tend to like make some graphics on the side just to have fun with it kind of thing.
I had totally forgotten this until now, but my first job out of college, I answered phones at the front desk of the newsroom for a while, and it was interesting. But every day I would just like keep tallies of stuff, and some of it was I was required to, and some of it was just kind of fun for me. And then I would make like charts of just like reasons why people called, and I would put them on my blog because it was like the heyday of blogging. And like no one expected me to do that. Like probably only a couple dozen people ever saw those ever, but it was a really good way to just keep me like making something on a daily basis. And there were enough people in the newsroom who kind of enjoyed it that it felt like I had an audience, and it kept me accountable to just like working on those skills. And and developing that is something also that I felt strongly about as an identity, because I don't think before that I would have gone around saying like I can make charts, and after that, I felt like I could.
That is definitely some great advice. Yeah, so talking about like just moving to a different topic, like talking about visualizations that you choose in your day-to-day stories, like how do you decide the trade-off between simple graphs and new graphs, like new visual vocabularies? How do you decide that trade-off between simplicity and complexity?
Well, time can be a very decisive factor.
I was going to say that too.
Sorry. Time. If this thing needs to be out, if there's a deadline, if this is a very competitive story and you need a visual to go along with it, and you know that like your competitors are going to have the same visuals, then yeah, like that's a factor of like going a little simpler and just be like, we need to get this out instead of having like all these fancy things. But also like it's also like, because sometimes like I have an idea in my head and then like I see it and then I realize, oh, I'm the only one that's going to understand this. This is way too complicated. So sometimes just like planning things out and then seeing the visualization might like be a good it might be a good tell whether you need to simplify or whether you need to like make this more complex, whether you want like because sometimes the things that like are in your head don't pan out. So I found that to be like very helpful.
I think that we tend to err on the side of accessibility, especially because a lot of times your big fancy visualization that looks awesome on desktop is not going to fit on a phone, and it won't work on mobile, and that is where most people are reading it. So like that is a big aspect of it. When we want to try crazy visualization shapes, usually what we try to do is break it into steps and like have a little scrolly sequence or something at the beginning that walks people through the pieces of the visualization. So that's a technique that we'll often end up trying at the Tribune. But I mean, overall, people have to be able to understand what it is you're doing. I mean, it was really interesting early on in the pandemic when everybody was trying log scales, and it was like, okay, like nobody, we don't remember how to read those sometimes as graphic artists. So how are we going to expect readers to do it? And I saw some outlets do a better or worse job of kind of walking people through what the elements of that were. Everyone's more familiar now, so like, go for it next time you want to try a log scale. But yeah, people's visual vocabulary is always evolving, and it's fun to kind of push them in a different direction, but you want to make sure that it's all in service of the story and you're not just doing something for the sake of making it pretty or fancy.
Yeah, I mean, I think don't be afraid to take risks by any means, but when you fail, make sure that you understand why it failed. Because it'll happen, you'll have visualizations that you do that aren't as effective as others or aren't as popular as others, but you can learn from those things, and you can learn from what other people are doing, out there, and how people are enjoying, different graphical experiences versus others. I think the thing that, I've certainly gotten better about, and I think I'm following the lead of the community is not being fancy for fancy's sake. Simple flat graphics, they do the trick a lot of the time. You really have to, to Darla's point, be thinking about starting from mobile, because that's where your audience is. It's where most audience is, and building out from there. So, you really want to pick your spots when you try to do something bigger and more complex.
Yeah. I think it's important for myself, at least. I adhere pretty strictly to the sort of keep it simple, stupid rule. I think that's important for a number of reasons. And number one is that I find it's very easy to have a great idea for this fancy visualization, and then you end up making your data sort of fit into this visualization, which is exactly the opposite way. Like you need to choose a visualization in a format that really expresses and communicates that data in the most effective way and efficient way. And sometimes that means it's just got to be like a really simple line chart. And sometimes that means you get more opportunity to do things more complex, right? And more visually striking. And and I don't know. I mean, maybe it's because I come from an IT background. I tend to sort of have this internal part of me that tends to try and over-engineer something at first, and I have to be like, no, let's just back that up. We need to go simple. But I think the most important thing really to keep in mind is like, is this data visualization, like who is it presenting the data, right? Or is is your data being presented in the visualization, excuse me, or is this visualization somehow, has it like overtaken your data because you're like, I've got this great idea for what I want to present, and now you've kind of lost your message. And then one other really quick point, which I think was touched on, is also like, we talk about people reading on the phone, and it has to be viewable on the phone, has to work on the phone, but also like the story itself. Like if it's a relatively quick story that people are going to read through in 2 or 3 minutes or something like that, do you want to spend a bunch of time, like days and days and days, working on a visualization for a story that's going to be basically like something that some people are reading while they wait for the bus? So you also want to think a little bit about the story itself, and does the greater context of the story justify or lend itself to something more complex, or will that more complex thing, maybe it'll drive further engagement on the story? Sorry, I feel like I've made this more complicated than it needs to be now, but anyway.
One thing I tell my students is like over and over again is when in doubt, use a bar chart, which is a good thing about teaching, because now I have that like little teacher voice in the back of my head whenever I'm doing my own work too. And it's like, okay, fine, just make it a bar chart. And I realized that like a portfolio of bar charts is not like the most inspiring thing. And so you should branch out and find the projects that are worth it to try something else. But as far as communicating, like there's no reason to overcomplicate that. In the past few years, I've started doing like data art occasionally, and that's been fun because it gives me that outlet where I don't have to explain it, and I can try weird things, and it doesn't have to be, I can expect that if somebody wants to view it and understand it, they'll take the time to engage and do that. But you can't assume that with news. So you really can't, unless you're really educating somebody on something that they care about. And I think the coronavirus graphics are a good example. Like people have been willing to learn new forms because they care so much about that information. But like, yeah, your daily story, no one's going to spend that much time trying to figure out your really complex graphic.
Well, one other thing, sorry to jump in again. I think there's one thing that I do sometimes feel is there's a bit of a sense of like a simple graphic is somehow like less, it's just not as good as something that's bigger, But I mean, I have seen very simple bar charts with like one bar colored differently, or a simple line chart where you can just, sometimes that really tells a story for you and you really don't need anything. So I would just caution against anyone starting ever worrying like, oh, like I'm just doing bar charts again. Like, oh, that's not going to be like, yes, sometimes like that's actually really compelling and that's all you need. Like, so we should we should be careful about conflating sort of quality with complexity. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I also think it's really important to think about like your visualization in terms of the other media on the page, whether that be print or digital. It's, is what you're doing in service of everything else that you are putting out with it? Are you putting out a visualization with video and text? You want your reader to be able to have the best experience possible, because ultimately what you're doing with that visualization generally is breaking down a complex thing into something simple and more digestible for people. So, try to think, I always try to think of the whole package when I'm approaching something like that.
I guess to touch on that, I guess I'm the same way, like keeping it more simple. And I know this is going to sound bad at first, but when I'm making graphics, I kind of think that the audience is kind of dumb, so I have to like make it as simple as possible without explaining too much or like going into the weeds. And so, I kind of like take a break and kind of like look at it like from perspective and trying to see like, okay, like as a reader, would I get confused by this kind of thing? And and want the graphic to add value to the story, like not like a stay away or like not finish the story because like the graphic was like distracting or whatever.
One thing I'm inspired by is like the instructions they put on like instant food, where it has like 3 steps and it shows you a little picture of it. because I like to remember that like your audience, it's not that they couldn't get it if they tried. It's just that like a lot of times people don't care enough, right? They want like the instant food version of information. And so like if you hand them some like French cookbook when they're tired at the end of the day, like they're never going to get through it. But like doing something small, that's what people can actually absorb a lot as they go about their lives.
Awesome. Thanks so much for all of that. There's one question in the chat that I think we can cover really quickly. Do you all have data editors, or is it one editor that does both editing for data stories and for regular stories? And if you don't have a specific data editor, how do you sort of communicate what you're trying to do and the limitations of your work as well with your regular editors that aren't necessarily data specific?
Well, Darla's my data editor, so that answers that question. But yeah, and then before I worked with a data editor too, but like also like just different kind of editors that didn't have the same background in data that I had. So they were like a lot more generalists, more investigative editors. So I've run like the gamut. Like I think Darla's like the first data editor of like, oh, she like comes from that world and she like knows that space. And yeah, like, and so like they can be like really good good things and bad things, like about like both like just sort of setups, but yeah, but like when you don't have like an editor that like knows data, it does become a challenge of not so much explaining, but just sort of well, I guess, yeah, explaining is the right verb of communicating like exactly like what you're doing and how much work it will take and like what is possible and what is not. Like, yeah, like it's because sometimes like editors that aren't in the space will get ideas that are hard to like to implement or to like start because they don't understand like the work that goes into it. So sometimes it is about like just sort of managing your editors and managers' expectations. And like as I said in the beginning, it takes like a lot of like communication between your editors and managers to be able to do that.
I think being like super clear is absolutely vital as well for that reason. I'm in sort of a unique situation in that I'm operating in an editor role right now, but I have partnerships with Frontline, USA Today, and 5 Gannett local newsrooms that I also work with. And my tendency is, so they're not really, I'm operating as sort of the data editor on the story, but I will, certainly always defer to local expertise, where I don't have it. But, it's always been super important, to Carla's point, to sort of have those clear communication lines when you're communicating with an editor or an editor communicating with a reporter, of what is possible and why, or what isn't possible and why, because, those are battles you're going to have to fight, every day, probably.
I think the step at which I, as a data editor, the step at which I get most anxious about this is like replicability of your work. Like, you could go the full ProPublica route and say, okay, everything we publish with data has to be rerun twice, like write it in R, then do it in Python. And so some people have room for that, and there's time if you're only doing investigative work, but like we're kind of trying to explore a middle ground where we can fact check everything that we're saying with data, but it's not like a full process. So I want to help anybody who's doing data journalism work at the Tribune, which isn't just people on the data team, feel comfortable saying like, okay, here's how we're going to fact check what you're doing. Here's what we're going to look for. And I want you to walk me through the steps you took to get from point A to point B. And like, how did you change the data along the way? So that's a kind of an aspect of like closer to publication that you need to be aware of, in addition to like selling your ideas to a non-data editor. And a lot of editors, like, I mean, really, all the other editors are awesome at the Trib, but I think we don't give them enough credit sometimes. It's like, oh, they don't get it, and there's definitely some that don't, but a lot of them, like, they do, and they're interested in this, and they want to be able to make their stories less about anecdotes and more about evidence.
Mhm.
So they want, like, that's something that they want to do, and so you can help them do that.
Yeah, I've never really encountered too many editors or non-data editors in my time that aren't excited about the work that I brought to them. And it's like, it's often just that, they get too excited. And then you have to manage them, to both Darla and Carla's point, that's the problem that I end up finding more often is not that, people are pushing me off and like, oh, because they don't get it or anything. It's that they get overly excited about what can and may be possible in a short amount of time.
Yeah, I think it's important to just be pretty explicit. Like, I want to do X and it's going to take these many steps and I'm going to need this much time for step A, B, C. And I expect the findings based on my preliminary work, I'm expecting to find or be able to deliver this, that, and this, just so that it's very clear for them. I think the bulletproofing, if you don't have a data editor, I don't currently have a specific data editor right now, so I pitched to just a city desk editor, and then I have a pretty good editor, a digital editor, who's once the story's been submitted, who's pretty good with going through that with me. But I think bulletproofing your own data, even if you have a data editor, which I've had in the past, which is better, obviously, but learning to know how to sort of bulletproof your own data is so important. You'll sleep better at night when you hit publish, for one thing. It's a super important skill to have, like just knowing about like documenting all your changes and just making something that is as much as possible either reproducible, or at least you have the instructions to go back and go through it. Like just knowing how to do all that kind of stuff. That's not so as important on the pitch side, but it's super essential for the publication side. And if you don't have a data editor, that's an easy one to fall through the cracks.
Yeah. So to the point of bulletproofing your data, like one thing you can also reach out to the beat reporters that like, or if your data is about like a certain beat, like sometimes like they can like smell bad data or smell like, there's something like wrong with the numbers. So it's always great to just like double check with them, or like someone in academia, like a source, like you don't have to like give them your whole like, like fancy Python notebook and like have them figure it out. It could be like, these are the top line numbers. Do these make sense? And sometimes they can be like, well, yes or no, or did you think about like this or that, or like back 2 years ago, this event happened, so it could have like affected your data. Like they're a wealth of knowledge of like the specifics of they don't have to know about the data, but they can know about the subject matter that they can like sense out, like if this makes sense or not.
Awesome.
Just on bulletproofing real quick, Carla and I made a document based off of something that Tom Mayer did with our team when we were both in New Jersey on bulletproofing data. And it was a checklist that sort of followed me through my career and has changed over time. I don't follow it to a T every time, but it's just a great sort of resource of questions to ask yourself that you can go through with a colleague, that you can go through with another data journalist if you're on your own. It was something that we created a few years ago.
Perfect. So we're getting close to time, but we have 2 more questions, if that's okay. The first one is really quick. If you all as data journalists have any specific ways that you measure the impact of your stories, and if not, that's okay. We're just curious about, if you like track Twitter reactions, or if your company potentially has a way to like track engagement, and if you sort of engage with that or not.
I often look at the engagement on my stories to see like what's up, because I want to see how well they're doing, and sometimes like readers they really like the story or really hate it. They email you. So one story, a few people called me up and was like, "Hey, I really like it. Can you do something for me?" And then I feel that was a pretty good story to do. Like if you start to get emails, and I tend to look on Facebook or Twitter to see what people are saying on it and kind of gauge from there.
I think we'll obviously look at traffic and social mentions and discussions. We get a lot of email from readers when they're mad, just like everybody else. But the other thing that we do is we try to measure clicks on things that we're curious how they work. So if we're trying something really experimental with scroll or with narrative, or like, are people really clicking this button? What are they searching for? Then we'll try to track that in the analytics on the piece, especially if it's custom. So we can kind of say, okay, is this working or not? It's like, we'll work with our engineering team. It's like, let's do an A/B test. Which version works better? Like, let's try to actually make this a little more scientific. And that way we can know when we try something, is it really resonating with people, like based on their behavior with it. And also, I have a baby cameo now, so because this is real life right now. Here's my baby.
Yay!
Yeah.
That's a very cute baby.
Great. Cool. So just to wrap everything up, we want to ask everybody what advice you would give to early career folks who want to enter into data journalism. You can take it as current advice. You can take it as what would you tell your younger self. But just a quick couple of sentences to leave our early career folks with some early career specific advice.
I guess mine's always been to just do something.
Yeah.
Try something, like do it on your own time, do it on, like, if you're passionate about this, make the time to do and try things and to fail on your own, and to, all of this is in service of something better later. So, but, the thing that I see hurting most early career journalists more than anything is, a sort of, people can get stuck in ruts, or they can get burned out. They can lose what they enjoy doing this in the first place. So, I personally think it's really important to, like, to stoke my own passion sort of on a regular basis with stuff I like doing.
I would, that's great advice. I would suggest, one thing which I think I wish I had learned earlier was start with like, I guess because I've worked in daily news quite a bit. So maybe focus on things that you think you could turn in a day, right? Like, that's one of the things that I always got caught on was, I got this great project and it's going to be X and Y and blah, blah, blah. And then like 4 days into it, I'm like, oh, Jesus, what have I got myself into? And then like pressure starts to build because you're like, now you've got editors being like, so what's up with that story, blah, blah, blah. Particularly since I've come here and I'm doing like, I'll do graphics every day, often multiple graphics every day, little short stories. Like the ability to say, okay, you know what, this has come up in the news today. I know it's a really simple data set that I know is going to work with this. It's going to be there's going to be a nice story in there. And that's something that I can turn out like a couple hundred words and maybe one chart. You know what I mean? Like simple things like that. Your editors like that kind of, your editors are particularly, I mean, I'm at like the daily paper I'm at right now, like they're always looking for like content to fill like news holes, right? This is seems like a common thing. Like if you can say like, hey, I could give you this, I could work on this today and you'll have this by the end of the day, your editors will love you. You know what I mean? And then once they love you, then they're happy to give you more time to dig into things that that are going to take you more time, right? Like maybe baby steps or bite-sized chunks or whatever you want to call it,
I feel a lot of applications and questions from people who are trying to switch careers into data journalism. And I think the most successful people I see making that switch have really done their homework. Like reach out to people, ask them questions within reason. Most people working as data journalists will be happy to chat with you directly one-on-one and say like, hey, I'll look at your portfolio, like answer your questions about it. Because it's not like a direct switch. Like you could go straight from doing data in an academic setting to doing journalism. Like journalism is its own thing. So just for people, if anybody out there is switching, be aware of that, and that it's not like there's some different aspects to it, and it's something to explore.
I work with a lot of like student journalists who are then making that transition to the professional world. And I think that's a really hard transition for anyone, regardless of what kind of job you want to do. And so one thing I just always try to mention is that like careers aren't linear. Like you're not trying to get there overnight. Like you can work on a lot of different things and still eventually get to doing, you know, a full-time data position. And a cool thing about data is that like it can be basically any job in journalism. Like if you're into sports, like by all means take a sports position. If you're into business or arts, like any of those things can be related to data. And you don't have to be like really as narrowly focused even as some other specialized positions are. And it's actually a benefit, right? Like being a generalist actually helps you in the long run. So I think it's nice to know that like there's not just one path, there's like a whole lot of paths you can take, and they will probably all take you somewhere rewarding if you can stick with it, which is probably the hard part.
Yeah, and if you are at a place where you want to where you're doing something else, you're reporting, and you want to make the switch to data reporting, or in any organization, if you're like not in journalism, like it's good to like find like the mentors and the people that can help you do that. Like like maybe there's someone in your organization that's a little higher up that, and you want to talk to them and be like, listen, I really want to get into data journalism. I want to do more data stuff. Like, can you give me the space and time? Because like, yeah, like that's another thing. It's like you're gonna burn yourself out if you're like working and trying to like do data stuff on the side to try to learn. Like that's like that. So like sometimes you can find allies within your newsroom, and like that can not just help you, but make space for you, make the time, be like, okay, like it's like I'm going to give you some time to explore, this side of you. And like, that's always really helpful.
I guess for me, I guess be really flexible and like, always trying to learn new stuff and I guess explore too. Like a lot of times I make graphics for other reporters because they don't have a data skill. So I overhear stuff as like, hey, I found a data set for you. I can make a quick graphic for you. And a lot of times you get like more experience from that too, just and get more work out there as well. I think.
Thank you. So we have almost reached the end. It's 1-2. I'm on the on the West Coast. So yeah, thank you so much for tuning in. It was such a great talk, and I think everyone who has attended, or I'll be posting this on YouTube channel, will definitely learn a lot from this. And yeah, if you have any resources that you would like to share with early career folks, please, you can send out an email to Emilia, or you can send out an email to me. We can share on the Slack channel. And I would like to thank Emilia for taking this up. I completely messed up the start. And yeah, she has been helpful in moderating. Like we had a 3-week discussion running on the Early Career channel. So if you want to go to our channel and then answer some questions, we have like a 3-week discussion. So that would also be great. Thank you so much.
Yep. Thanks, everybody. We really appreciate y'all sharing your perspectives.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.